When the Prime Minister accused Anthony Albanese during Wednesday's leaders' debate of taking China's side, the opposition leader went on the attack.
I was the one who called them out on the pandemic and was called a racist. And when we shut the borders at the start of the pandemic, they accused me of being racist about that as well. No, I was protecting Australia. But what I don't understand is that when something of this significance takes place, why would you take China's side?
That's an outrageous slur from the Prime Minister, and it shouldn't be. National security issues shouldn't be the subject of that sort of slur. The truth is that we all know that China has changed.
After the debate, when other commentators said the Prime Minister had gone too far with those comments, I said this.
And there is a big difference between Labor and the Liberal Party on China, and there's a legacy very much in the New South Wales Labor Party, and you can't walk away from that.
You see, I've been around this issue for a long time, and revelations today about Labor's Deputy Leader Richard Marles show just how right I actually was. Because when it comes to resisting China's push into the South Pacific, that's exactly where Richard Marles is, on China's side. In speeches and articles as recently as last year, Labor's Deputy Leader, their former Defence spokesman, who expects to be Defence Minister if they're elected in a few weeks' time, said that trying to deny China its place in the Pacific would be, and I quote, an historic mistake. As the Australian newspaper reports today in a monograph published last year called Tides That Bind, Marles said that basing our action in the Pacific on an attempt to strategically deny China would be an historic mistake. He went on, not only would this be detrimental to our regional relationships, it would be a failed course of action. Labor's Deputy Leader could well be Australia's next Prime Minister, next Deputy Prime Minister, if Labor wins the coming election. And Marles went on, saying that Australia has no right to expect a set of exclusive relationships with Pacific nations. They are perfectly free to engage, he said, on whatever terms they choose with China or any other country. So according to Marles, if the Solomons want to sell China a naval base, well, that's quite okay. But only yesterday, here was his leader describing the security agreement between the Solomons and China as, I quote, a massive failure of our foreign policy. Indeed, all Scott Morrison's fault.
This government have gone missing. They had enough notice to engage and do something about this. China is more aggressive. China is more forward-leaning. We all accept that. The difference is, how do you respond to it?
Yet the pro-China position from Labor's leadership number 2 didn't stop there. In a speech in Beijing in 2019, Richard Marles said of China's development assistance in the Pacific, and I quote, "Let me be crystal clear, that was and has been a good thing. The Pacific needs help and China needs to welcome any country willing to provide it." So what does Labor really think? That China's involvement with countries like the Solomons is a positive development to be encouraged, as its Deputy Leader thought only last year? Or that China's security deal with the Solomons is a strategic disaster that its leader now thinks? Because they both can't be right. It's hard to avoid the conclusion that for Labor, the real strategic opponent here is not the Chinese government, but the Morrison one. And that Labor's only against China where China can be used as a stick to beat Scott Morrison. As I said on Wednesday night, I'll say it here again, the Australian Labor Party, and in particular its New South Wales branch, has had a long and worrying history with China. Bob Carr's over-the-top pro-China rhetoric, disgraced former Senator Sam Daciari's dodgy donations, and the scandal over his pro-China policy positions, announced in staged press conferences with Chinese-speaking media only, and more. When the government closed our borders to China at the start of the pandemic and China objected, Labor was critical of the government for damaging our relationship with Beijing. When the government called for a full, independent investigation into the Wuhan virus and China complained, Labor said the government risked damaging our relationship with Beijing. When China started boycotting our trade goods, Labor said it was the government's fault for not having better relations with China. For Labor, it's always about domestic politics. And the problem with always thinking politically is that it stops you thinking strategically. That's why Labor's totally confused about whether China's a friend or a foe, because all it can ever think of is clawing its way back to government. And frankly, that's why Labor's unworthy of being in power, because it hasn't worked out what it really thinks. And it isn't sure about how it would handle the big issues facing our country and our region. You can't trust Labor to turn back votes. I've been there. You can't trust them. And you can't trust their leader, who says only a couple of years ago he didn't want to do that. And you can't trust Labor to stand up to China when today we find out the deputy didn't want to do that as early as last year.